You're not lazy. Your environment is working against you. A science-based guide to redesigning your world for focus, motivation, and lasting change. We do not rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. Archilochus adapted. Introduction. The blame game we were never meant to win. There is a story we tell ourselves, and it goes something like this: I know what I need to do. I know I should exercise, eat better, finish the project, stop scrolling, save money, read more, sleep earlier. I just can't seem to do it. What's wrong with me? That word, me, carries an enormous amount of weight. It is the conclusion we reach after every failed resolution, every abandoned gym membership, every task that sat undone on the to-do list for 3 weeks before we quietly deleted it. We tried. We failed. Therefore, we are the problem. This book is here to challenge that story, not to let you off the hook, but to redirect your energy toward what actually works. Because the evidence, drawn from decades of behavioral psychology, neuroscience, environmental design, and economics, tells a very different story. One in which the situation, the setting, and the invisible forces surrounding you have far more power over your behavior than your character, your willpower, or your desire to improve. You are not lazy. You are a human being navigating an environment that was largely designed by people who profit from your distraction, your impulsivity, and your inability to resist what is easy and immediately rewarding. You are losing a game that was rigged before you even sat down to play. The question was never, why can't I do this? The question was always, what in my environment is making this harder than it needs to be? Consider the following. In the 1950s, most Americans maintained a healthy body weight without going to gyms or counting calories. Not because they had stronger willpower or superior discipline, but because their environment demanded physical movement. They walked to the store. They cooked from scratch. Television was limited to a few hours a day. Food portions were smaller, and junk food was scarce and expensive. Today, the opposite is true. We live in what researchers call an obesogenic environment, one that systematically promotes overconsumption and undermovement. Fast food restaurants on every corner, supersized portions is the norm, screens competing for every idle moment, and engineered hyper-palatable foods designed in laboratories to override your body's natural satiety signals. And then we wonder why individual willpower fails. Or consider the smartphone. The average person now touches their phone over 2,600 times a day. Not because modern people are weaker or more distracted than previous generations. Because an entire industry staffed with the world's best psychologists, engineers, and behavioral economists has devoted itself, with billions of dollars in resources, to making your phone the most irresistible object you have ever encountered. They study exactly how to trigger your dopamine system. They A/B test notification timing. They design infinite scroll so there is never a natural stopping point. And then, when you cannot put it down, you blame yourself. This is the blame game. And you were never meant to win it. What this book will do. This book will do 3 things. First, it will explain the science behind why environments shape behavior so powerfully, why context is, in many respects, destiny. You will understand how your brain's ancient architecture interacts with your modern surroundings in ways that are almost never in your favor, and why trying harder is often the least effective solution to a problem that isn't actually about effort. Second, it will identify the specific environmental forces that are most likely working against you right now. From the physical architecture of your home and workplace, to the social environment around you, to the digital landscape you inhabit, to the temporal rhythms of your day, you will see clearly, perhaps for the first time, the invisible hands shaping your choices. Third, and most importantly, it will give you a concrete, practical framework for redesigning your environment so that good behavior becomes easier and bad behavior becomes harder. Not through self-punishment or extreme discipline, but through intelligent design, the same principles that companies use against you, deployed in your own service. This is not a book about lowering your standards. It is a book about being smarter about how you pursue them. Ambition and drive matter, but they work best when they are channeled through an environment that supports them, rather than constantly undermined by one that doesn't. A note on responsibility. Before we go further, let's address the elephant in the room. Doesn't this argument let people off the hook? If the environment is always to blame, why bother trying? The answer is that acknowledging the power of your environment does not eliminate your agency, it actually expands it. When you believe the problem is your character, you have very little room to maneuver. Character is slow to change and deeply resistant to effort. But when you understand that the problem is your environment, you have enormous power. You can rearrange your furniture. You can delete an app. You can change who you spend time with. You can restructure your morning routine. These are not small things. They are, as we will see, often the difference between success and failure. This book asks you to accept responsibility for designing your life, not for your neurological responses to a world that was deliberately designed to exploit them. That distinction is not semantic. It is everything. Let us begin. Part 1. The Invisible Architecture of Behavior. Chapter 1. Your brain wasn't built for the modern world. To understand why your environment has such power over your behavior, you first need to understand the machine doing the behaving, the human brain. And to understand the human brain, you need to appreciate one fundamental fact that shapes everything else: it was built for a world that no longer exists. The human brain is the product of roughly 200,000 years of evolutionary pressure as Homo sapiens, and several million more years of development in earlier hominid forms. Throughout almost all of that time, the challenges were immediate and physical. Find food before you starve, avoid predators, stay warm, form alliances within your small social group. The environment was relatively stable, information was scarce, and the consequences of most decisions were immediate and tangible. Then, in an evolutionary eye blink, perhaps the last 300 years, and especially the last 50, everything changed. The modern world arrived with its abundance of food, its information overload, its social media, its sedentary jobs, its artificial light, its global connectivity, and its endless parade of products and entertainments engineered to capture and hold attention. And your brain, running essentially the same software it ran on the African savanna, has been left scrambling to cope. The mismatch problem. Evolutionary psychologists call this the evolutionary mismatch, a situation in which an adaptation that was perfectly suited to ancestral conditions becomes maladaptive in a new environment. Consider sugar. For most of human history, sweet foods were rare, seasonal, and a reliable signal of high energy density: ripe fruit, honey, occasionally root vegetables. Your brain evolved a powerful reward response to sweetness because seeking it out was genuinely adaptive. Finding a beehive full of honey was a caloric windfall that might make the difference between survival and starvation. Now transpose that ancient craving onto a world where refined sugar is available in virtually infinite quantities, at low cost, engineered into nearly every processed food, and scientifically calibrated to hit your reward receptors with maximum efficiency. The same mechanism that once helped your ancestors thrive now contributes to obesity, diabetes, and metabolic disease for hundreds of millions of people. The brain hasn't changed, the environment has. The same mismatch applies to almost every behavioral challenge you face. Your brain craves novelty because novelty was often a signal of new resources or dangers worth investigating. Now novelty is delivered in an infinite stream by social media algorithms. Your brain is exquisitely sensitive to social comparison and status signals because maintaining your position in a small tribal group was survival critical. Now you are exposed, through television and social media, to thousands of status signals from people whose lives have been curated for maximum impressiveness. Your brain prioritizes immediate rewards over future ones, what economists call hyperbolic discounting, because in an uncertain ancestral world, a bird in the hand was genuinely worth two in the bush. Now this bias leads you to choose Netflix over the report you need to finish, the cookie over the salad, the comfort of inaction over the discomfort of change. The two systems, neuroscience and psychology, have converged on a model of human cognition that, while simplified, is enormously useful for understanding behavioral challenges. It is sometimes called the dual process model, popularized by Daniel Kahneman in his landmark book Thinking, Fast and Slow, which divided our thinking into System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, effortless, and largely unconscious. It is the system that lets you drive a familiar route while thinking about something else, that makes you flinch before you consciously register a loud noise, that generates your initial emotional reactions. System 1 is ancient in evolutionary terms, deeply shaped by experience and emotion, and extraordinarily powerful. It processes information in parallel, handles the vast majority of your daily decisions, and is almost never tired. System 2 is slow, deliberate, effortful, and conscious. It is the system you engage when you calculate a complex mathematical problem, learn a new skill, or carefully reason through a difficult decision. System 2 is newer in evolutionary terms, specifically human in many of its capabilities, and extraordinarily limited. It can hold only a handful of concepts in working memory at once, it depletes quickly with use, and it can be easily disrupted by stress, hunger, distraction, or fatigue. Here is the crucial insight. Nearly all of our aspirational goals, exercise regularly, eat healthy, finish important work, save money, require System 2. And nearly all of our environmental temptations, the notification, the snack, the comfortable sofa, the familiar distraction, operate through System 1. The modern environment has been constructed to constantly engage System 1 in ways that undermine what System 2 is trying to accomplish. Decision fatigue and the depleting resource. Within this framework, the concept of ego depletion, or decision fatigue, becomes critically important. Research by Roy Baumeister, Jonathan Levov, and others has shown that the capacity for self-control appears to be a limited resource, one that depletes with use and requires recovery. Every act of self-control, every decision, every instance of resisting temptation draws from the same cognitive reservoir. As the day wears on and that reservoir empties, our capacity for disciplined, future-oriented behavior diminishes. This is why the same person who makes excellent food choices at breakfast may binge on junk food by evening. Why the disciplined professional who powers through their morning work finds themselves scrolling social media for an hour by mid-afternoon. Why people are more likely to make impulsive decisions, in everything from financial choices to relationship conflicts, later in the day. The implication is profound and almost entirely ignored in conventional productivity advice. Your self-control is not a character trait. It is a physiological resource that fluctuates based on how much you have used it, how well you have slept, how much you have eaten, and dozens of other environmental factors. Expecting the same level of discipline at 9 p.m. after a difficult day as at 9 a.m. after a good night's sleep is not ambitious, it is physiologically unreasonable. The habit loop and environmental cues. Perhaps the most important piece of neuroscience for understanding environment's power over behavior is the habit loop, a process involving three components: a cue, a routine, and a reward. First described in detail by MIT researchers studying the basal ganglia, an ancient brain structure responsible for learned behaviors, the habit loop explains how behaviors become automatic. When you repeatedly perform a behavior in response to a specific cue and receive a reward, your brain gradually automates the sequence, transferring it from the effortful domain of System 2 to the effortless domain of System 1. The behavior becomes a habit, something you do without deliberate thought. This is adaptive. It frees cognitive resources for novel challenges. But it also means that the cues in your environment have extraordinary power to trigger behaviors, often ones you wish they didn't. The smell of popcorn in a movie theater triggers the desire to eat it, even if you just had dinner. The notification sound on your phone triggers the urge to check it, even when you are in the middle of important work. Walking into the kitchen triggers the desire to snack, even when you are not hungry. The couch triggers the desire to watch television. The bar triggers the desire to drink. These are not moral failures. They are learned responses encoded in your neural architecture by the repeated pairing of environmental cues with rewarding behaviors. Understanding this transforms the question of behavior change. Instead of, how do I resist this? The question becomes, how do I change the cue? Instead of, how do I force myself to do this? It becomes, how do I make this environment trigger the behavior I want? This is the beginning of environmental design thinking, and it is far more powerful than willpower. Every time you successfully resist a temptation through sheer willpower, you depleted a resource you need for the next battle. Every time you remove a temptation from your environment, you conserved that resource entirely. The neuroscience of defaults. One of the most powerful concepts in behavioral economics is the default effect, the finding that people are extraordinarily likely to stick with whatever option is presented as the default, even in high-stakes decisions. This has been demonstrated in organ donation. Countries with opt-out systems have donation rates over 90%. Opt-in countries struggle to reach 20%. Retirement savings automatic enrollment programs dramatically increase participation, and dozens of other domains. The reason is rooted in brain architecture. Changing from a default requires System 2 effort. You must notice the default, consider alternatives, decide to deviate, and take action to do so. Every step in that chain represents a potential dropout point. Defaults, by contrast, are effortless. Your brain takes the path of least resistance not because you are lazy but because conservation of cognitive resources is a fundamental operating principle of the human brain. This means the defaults in your environment, what is easiest, most visible, most accessible, will shape your behavior with remarkable power. If the default is a vending machine full of junk food, most people will eat junk food. If the default is a bowl of fruit on the counter, most people will eat fruit. If the default on your phone is social media on the home screen, you will check social media constantly. If the default is a work app or a reading app, your idle moments will go there instead. You are, in a very real sense, the product of your defaults. And your environment sets those defaults. Chapter 2. The Environment Behavior Loop. In 1973, psychologists Mark Lepper, David Green, and Richard Nisbett ran an experiment that would become one of the most cited studies in the history of social psychology. They took children who genuinely loved to draw, who did so spontaneously and with obvious pleasure, and divided them into 3 groups. One group was told they would receive a reward for their drawings, the expected reward group. One group received an unexpected reward after drawing. One group received no reward. The result was startling. The children who were told in advance that they would receive a reward for drawing showed a dramatic decrease in their intrinsic motivation to draw. In subsequent observations, when no reward was offered, these children drew significantly less than children in the other groups. The expected reward had transformed an internally motivated behavior into an externally motivated one, and when the external motivation was removed, the behavior collapsed. This study, known as the overjustification effect, illustrates something fundamental about human motivation. It is not purely internal. It is shaped in constant, dynamic interaction with the environment. We are not self-contained motivational systems that either have drive or don't. We are organisms in permanent dialogue with our surroundings, and those surroundings profoundly shape what we want, what we do, and how we feel about doing it. Situation versus disposition. The fundamental attribution error. Social psychologists have a name for the systematic mistake we make when we attribute behavior to internal character rather than external situation, the fundamental attribution error. It is fundamental because it is so pervasive and so consequential. We see someone behave badly and conclude they are a bad person, ignoring the situational factors that may have driven their behavior. We see ourselves behave badly and, after some reflection, conclude we are a bad person, ignoring the situational factors that drove our own behavior. A landmark study by John Darley and Daniel Batson, conducted at Princeton Theological Seminary, demonstrated this error with cruel elegance. Seminary students were asked to prepare a talk about the parable of the Good Samaritan, the story of someone who stops to help an injured stranger, and then walk to another building to deliver it. Along the way, the researchers had planted a Confederate pretending to be in distress, slumped in an alley, clearly needing help. The results were sobering. Whether or not the student stopped to help had almost nothing to do with their personality, their religious commitment, or the content of the talk they had just prepared. The single strongest predictor was whether they were told they were running late. Students in a hurry stepped over or around the suffering stranger. Students with time stopped to help. The situation, not the person, drove the behavior. This does not mean character doesn't matter. It means situation and character interact, and that situation is often the more powerful variable, especially in the short term, and especially under conditions of stress, fatigue, or cognitive load, which describe much of modern life. Behavioral architecture. How environments shape choices. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, in their influential book Nudge, introduced the concept of choice architecture, the idea that whoever designs the environment in which choices are made inevitably shapes those choices, whether they intend or not. There is no neutral arrangement. Putting the salad at eye level in a cafeteria and the desserts at the back changes what people eat. Putting the stairs in a prominent location and hiding the elevator changes how people travel between floors. Placing condoms near the pharmacy checkout versus in a back aisle changes sexual health outcomes. Every environment is a choice architecture. The question is not whether your environment is shaping your behavior, but whether it is shaping it in your favor or against it. And for most people, in most areas of life, the honest answer is, against it. Your kitchen is probably arranged to make snacking easy and meal preparation laborious. Your phone is probably configured to interrupt you constantly and make deep focus difficult. Your social media feeds are probably curated by algorithms that maximize your time on the platform, not your well-being. Your commute probably involves sitting. Your work probably involves sitting. Your leisure probably involves sitting. The defaults of your life have been set, largely by others, in ways that serve their interests, not yours. The behavioral ecology concept. Ecologists use the term behavioral ecology to describe how an organism's behavior is shaped by the ecological constraints and affordances of its environment. A bird living in a dense forest develops different foraging strategies than the same species living on an open plain. The environment does not determine the bird's behavior entirely, but it powerfully constrains the space of likely behaviors. Human beings have a behavioral ecology too. The constraints and affordances of our environment. What is easy? What is accessible? What is visible? What is socially normative? What is immediately rewarding? Powerfully shape the space of our likely behaviors. A person growing up in a neighborhood without sidewalks or parks is less likely to exercise regularly, not because of insufficient willpower, but because their behavioral ecology makes exercise difficult and inconvenient. A person whose office has a well-stocked kitchen with healthy options is more likely to eat well at work, not because of superior self-control, but because their behavioral ecology makes it easier. Understanding yourself as an ecological creature, one whose behavior is inseparable from the environment you inhabit, is the conceptual foundation for everything that follows in this book. You are not a self-sufficient island of willpower and character. You are an organism embedded in a specific set of environmental conditions, and those conditions matter enormously. Feedback loops. When environment and behavior create each other. One of the most important and underappreciated aspects of the environment-behavior relationship is that it is bidirectional. Your environment shapes your behavior, yes. But your behavior also shapes your environment, and those changes in environment then feed back to shape future behavior. Consider the person who, during a stressful period, starts using their bedroom to work on their laptop. Initially it is just practical. But over time, the bedroom becomes associated with work and stress, making it harder to sleep. Poor sleep increases stress and reduces self-control. Reduced self-control leads to more late-night work in the bedroom. The behavior working in bedroom changed the environment, bedroom now associated with stress and work, which changed future behavior, worse sleep, more stress, more maladaptive coping. Or consider the positive version. Someone who clears out a corner of their apartment and sets up a dedicated writing space. Initially it is just a desk and a chair. But every time they write productively in that space, the association between the space and focused writing deepens. Eventually, sitting down at that desk becomes a cue for writing. Entering the space triggers the behavior, making it easier each time. The behavior, writing at the desk, changed the environment. Desk now equals writing, which changed future behavior, easier to write. These feedback loops mean that environment design is not a one-time intervention. It is a dynamic process of creating positive spirals, or, if you are not thoughtful about it, negative ones. The good news is that positive spirals, once started, tend to become self-sustaining. The challenging news is that so do negative ones. Which is why the first intervention, the first redesign, the first deliberate change to your environment, is often the most important. Chapter 3. Why willpower is the wrong tool. Our culture is obsessed with willpower. Self-help shelves are lined with books promising to unlock your inner discipline. Corporate training programs teach grit and resilience. Social media celebrates the 4 a.m. workout, the cold shower, the relentless grind. The message is consistent and loud. If you want something badly enough, and if you are disciplined enough, you will get it. Failure, by this logic, is simply insufficient desire or insufficient effort. This narrative is not only unhelpful, it is actively harmful. Because it directs your energy toward the least effective tool available, your willpower, while distracting you from the most effective tool, your environment. And it makes every lapse in discipline feel like a moral failing rather than a predictable physiological response to difficult environmental conditions. Let's be precise about what willpower actually is and what it can realistically do. The reality of willpower. Willpower, the capacity to override an impulse or temptation in favor of a more valued goal, is real. It exists. People do vary in it, and those differences have modest but measurable effects on life outcomes. The famous marshmallow test in which children who could delay gratification in early childhood showed better outcomes across a range of measures in adulthood, has entered popular consciousness as proof that self-control is a foundational life skill. But the picture is far more complicated than the popular narrative suggests. Later, more rigorous replications of the marshmallow test have shown that much of the variation in delay of gratification ability is explained not by some fixed character trait, but by socioeconomic background, trust in the tester. Children from less stable environments rationally trusted less that the promised reward would actually materialize and, crucially, the child's immediate environment. Children who were given strategies for making the task easier, like being told to cover their eyes or think about the marshmallow as a cloud, outperformed children with supposedly higher, natural, willpower who lacked those strategies. The lesson is not that self-control doesn't matter. It is that self-control is not a fixed, constitutional trait, and that it is dramatically more effective when supported by environmental strategies than when deployed alone against a hostile environment. The willpower budget. Beyond the question of whether willpower is a trait, there is the question of whether it is a resource, and the answer, while debated in its specific neurochemical mechanisms, is practically clear: yes. The more decisions you make, the more self-regulatory effort you exert, the more depleted your capacity for further self-regulation becomes. Studies examining judges' parole decisions found that the probability of a favorable ruling dropped dramatically over the course of a session, rebounding after food breaks. Medical residents making decisions late in long shifts make more medication errors. Shoppers make worse financial decisions later in a shopping trip than at the start. The mechanism may be contested, but the phenomenon, that self-regulatory capacity depletes with use, is robust across hundreds of studies. What this means practically is that every time your environment puts a temptation in front of you and you resist it through willpower, you have paid a cost. Every resistance depletes the budget. And since the modern environment is extraordinary at placing temptations in front of you, the notification, the snack, the social media feed, the comfortable distraction, it is extraordinarily good at bankrupting your self-regulatory account before the day is even half over. This is why highly disciplined people don't rely on willpower. They rely on environment design. The most successful athletes don't keep junk food in their houses and then valiantly resist eating it. They don't have it in their houses. The most focused writers don't fight the urge to check their email while writing. They disconnect from the internet. The most effective savers don't continually resist the urge to spend. They have money automatically transferred to savings accounts before they can access it. They reduce the number of decisions requiring willpower by designing their environment so that good choices are the default. The myth of motivation. Closely related to the willpower myth is the motivation myth, the idea that you need to feel motivated before you can take action. I'll start when I feel ready. I just need to find my passion. I know I should, but I can't seem to make myself want to. These are the refrains of people waiting for an internal state that may never reliably arrive. The research on motivation tells a counterintuitive story. Action precedes motivation more often than motivation precedes action. In other words, you are more likely to feel motivated after you start doing something than before. The behavioral activation model in cognitive behavioral therapy is built on exactly this insight. When people are depressed and unmotivated, the therapeutic approach is not to wait for motivation but to schedule activities anyway, because doing the activities creates the motivation. This is partly explained by what psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi called flow, the state of absorbed, intrinsically rewarding engagement that emerges when a task is challenging enough to be interesting but not so difficult as to be overwhelming. Flow is not a precondition for starting. It is a reward that sometimes comes after starting. And the environmental conditions that support or inhibit flow, the presence or absence of distraction, the clarity or confusion of the task, the comfort or discomfort of the physical setting, are far more influential on whether you achieve it than your motivational state when you begin. Similarly, the concept of temptation bundling, developed by behavioral scientist Katie Milkman, demonstrates that pairing an intrinsically enjoyable activity with a productive one, only listening to your favorite podcast while exercising, for example, can dramatically increase the likelihood of engaging in the productive behavior. This is not about motivation in the traditional sense. It is about environment design, specifically, about structuring the environment so that desired behaviors are accompanied by immediate rewards. Identity versus willpower. A better frame. James Clear, in Atomic Habits, argues convincingly that the deepest level of behavior change is identity change, not changing what you do, but changing who you are. The person who says, "I am a runner," behaves differently than the person who says, "I am trying to run more." The former has incorporated the behavior into their self-concept, the latter is still relying on willpower to overcome the gap between who they are and what they are trying to do. Identity and environment are deeply intertwined. Your identity, the story you tell about who you are, is built partly through the feedback of your environment. When the people around you expect certain behaviors from you, when your spaces are associated with certain activities, when your routines are established around certain practices, your identity as the person who does those things strengthens. The environment doesn't just shape individual behaviors, it shapes who you become over time. But identity is not where most people can start. Identity change follows behavior change, which follows environmental change. You become a runner by running, which is most likely to happen when your environment makes running easy, expected, convenient, and socially reinforced. Change the environment. The behaviors will change. The identity will follow. Part 2. The 6 Environmental Villains. Chapter 4. The Distraction Economy. There is a phrase that has entered the business lexicon in the last decade, the attention economy. It refers to the commercial reality that in a world of information abundance, human attention has become the scarce resource that powers the most valuable companies on Earth. Google, Meta, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Netflix, these companies do not sell you a product. They sell your attention to advertisers. The more of your attention they can capture, for longer periods, with greater intensity, the more money they make. This creates a fundamental misalignment between your interests and theirs. Your interest is in a life of meaning, focus, productivity, deep relationships, and well-being. Their interest is in the maximum number of minutes you spend on their platforms, measured in aggregate for millions of users. And they have deployed extraordinary resources, the best engineers, the deepest psychological research, the most sophisticated machine learning systems, in service of that goal. You, with your unaided willpower, are the opposing army. The architecture of distraction. The specific mechanisms by which digital platforms capture and hold attention are not accidental. They have been deliberately designed, tested, and optimized. Understanding them is the first step toward defending against them. Variable reward schedules are one of the most powerful tools in the attention economy's arsenal. B. F. Skinner discovered in the 1950s that intermittent, unpredictable reinforcement creates the strongest and most persistent behavioral responses, more powerful even than consistent reinforcement. Slot machines operate on this principle, and so does every social media feed. When you scroll through Instagram or Twitter, you never know what you will find. Sometimes a post makes you laugh. Sometimes you discover something fascinating. Sometimes you see something that makes you feel good about yourself. The unpredictability is the mechanism. Your brain is scanning for the reward with the same neurological anticipation that evolved to scan for food or danger. Infinite scroll was designed specifically to eliminate the natural stopping points that exist in other media. The end of a page, the chapter break, the commercial. There is always more, and the algorithmic curation of feeds ensures that what you see is calibrated, through constant experimentation, to be exactly interesting enough to keep you watching without being so satisfying that you feel complete. Notification systems are designed to be impossible to ignore. The red badge on an app icon, the vibration, the sound, these are environmental cues that trigger automatic checking behavior. Over time, the mere presence of your phone, even face down and silent, has been shown in research to reduce cognitive capacity for tasks requiring concentration, simply because part of your brain is monitoring it. The deep work crisis. Cal Newport, in his book Deep Work, makes a distinction between deep work, cognitively demanding tasks performed in a state of focused concentration, and shallow work, routine, administrative, easily replicated tasks. He argues, with considerable evidence, that the ability to perform deep work is becoming both rarer and more valuable in the modern economy, just as it is being systematically destroyed by the distraction environment most people inhabit. The mechanism of destruction is interruption, and the research on interruption is alarming. Studies at the University of California, Irvine found that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully return to a deep work state. Given that most office workers are interrupted every 3 to 5 minutes, and that most knowledge workers spend hours per day in a state of constant fragmented attention, checking email, responding to messages, monitoring notifications, the time available for genuinely deep, high-value cognitive work is vanishingly small. What is most insidious about this is that people adapt to fragmented attention environments. After years of constant interruption, the brain becomes structurally adapted to shallow attention patterns. The capacity for sustained focus atrophies, in much the same way that a muscle does when not used. People report finding it genuinely difficult to read a long-form article without reaching for their phone. Graduate students who used to read for hours find they cannot concentrate for 30 minutes. The environment has literally reshaped the brain's capacity for attention. The dopamine landscape. To understand why the distraction economy is so powerful, you need to understand dopamine, not as the pleasure chemical, as it is commonly mischaracterized, but as the anticipation and reward prediction chemical. Dopamine is released not primarily when you receive a reward, but when you anticipate one. It is the neurological signal of, something good might be here, which drives you to seek. The modern digital environment has created what some researchers call a dopamine landscape of unprecedented density. Every notification is a potential reward. Every scroll is a potential discovery. Every like, comment, or share is a small hit of social validation. These micro-rewards keep the dopamine system in a state of constant low-level activation, which feels good in the moment, stimulating and engaging, but which has significant costs. One cost is hedonic adaptation. As your dopamine system becomes accustomed to high-density reward environments, ordinary life activities begin to feel insufficiently stimulating. The novel is boring compared to the feed. The conversation is less interesting than the video. Real life feels flat and dull, not because it has changed, but because your reward thresholds have been recalibrated upward by the artificial intensity of the digital environment. This is not metaphorical. Neuroimaging studies show measurable changes in the dopamine systems of heavy social media users. The comparison machine. Social media has also introduced a form of environmental toxicity with no real historical precedent: constant, ambient social comparison. Human beings evolved to compare themselves with the small social groups they actually inhabited, perhaps 50 to 150 people. These groups included people who were visibly struggling alongside those who were thriving. Comparison, in this context, provided useful information and was moderated by intimacy and realistic understanding of other people's full lives. Social media inverts this almost entirely. You now compare yourself, continuously, to a curated sample of thousands of people presenting their best moments, most flattering images, and most impressive achievements. The people who are thriving most visibly are most prominent in your feed. The people who are struggling quietly are invisible. The result is a comparison environment so systematically distorted that it would be extraordinary if it didn't produce anxiety, inadequacy, and dissatisfaction, and research consistently shows that it does. Studies examining the relationship between social media use and well-being repeatedly find negative associations, particularly for passive consumption, scrolling and watching without engaging. The more time people spend in passive social media consumption, the more likely they are to feel depressed, anxious, and inferior. This is not a coincidence. The comparison machine was not designed to make you feel good. It was designed to keep you coming back. Chapter 5. The Comfort Trap. Comfort is not the enemy of achievement. Reasonable physical comfort is necessary for sustained performance. People who are too cold, too hot, too hungry, or in pain cannot concentrate or function well. But there is a distinction between functional comfort and what we might call excessive comfort, the kind that removes all friction from life, eliminates the need for physical effort, and makes the path of least resistance so easy and so rewarding that meaningful challenges seem unnecessarily difficult by comparison. Modern life, particularly in wealthy countries, has created a comfort environment without historical precedent. Temperature-controlled environments have eliminated the need to tolerate heat and cold. Sedentary transportation has eliminated the need to walk. Labor-saving devices have eliminated most physical effort from domestic life. Streaming services and smartphones have eliminated the need to tolerate boredom. Food delivery services have eliminated the need to cook. The cumulative effect is a life of extraordinary physical ease, and this ease is making us fragile, unfocused, and less capable in ways that the productivity advice industry entirely ignores. The physiology of inaction. The human body was designed for movement. This is not a metaphor or a moral judgment. It is a biological fact with profound implications for mental and cognitive performance. Regular physical activity affects virtually every system in the body that influences mental function. It increases cerebral blood flow, promotes neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons, particularly in the hippocampus, which is critical for memory and learning, reduces inflammation, regulates hormones that influence mood and stress, and improves the quality and duration of sleep. The research on exercise and cognitive performance is remarkable in its consistency and scope. A single bout of moderate aerobic exercise improves executive function, working memory, attention, and mood for hours afterward. Regular physical activity reduces the risk of depression and anxiety, both in healthy populations and as a treatment for diagnosed conditions. A landmark study published in JAMA Internal Medicine found that regular exercise was associated with a 48% lower risk of developing dementia. These are not minor effects. They are comparable to or better than many pharmaceutical interventions. Yet the default environment in which most people live, sedentary desk work, car-based transportation, screen-based leisure, actively discourages physical movement. The environment that would produce the best cognitive and emotional performance is precisely the opposite of the one most people inhabit. This is not an accident. Modern environments have been designed for efficiency and convenience, which in physical terms means elimination of effort. That the effort eliminated was also producing crucial cognitive and emotional benefits was not part of the calculation. The boredom deficit. In previous generations, boredom was an unavoidable part of life. Waiting in line, commuting, the gap between activities, these were periods of idle mental time. Neuroscientists and psychologists now understand that this idle time served important functions. It was when the default mode network of the brain, the circuit associated with self-reflection, daydreaming, creative problem-solving, and meaning-making, was most active. Boredom was not a bug. It was the operating condition for some of the brain's most important work. The smartphone has nearly eliminated boredom from modern life. Every idle moment is now filled with content. Waiting in line, the transition between meetings, the quiet before sleep, all of these have been colonized by the phone. And with boredom has gone the mental processing it supported. Research by Jonathan Schooler and others shows that mind wandering, often associated with boredom, is strongly correlated with creative insight and future planning. We are systematically eliminating the mental states that generate our best ideas and deepest self-understanding. The comfort trap, in this sense, extends beyond physical comfort to cognitive comfort, the elimination of the discomfort of boredom, of difficult thought, of the effort required to sit quietly with oneself. And just as physical comfort has made us physically weaker, cognitive comfort has made us cognitively weaker, less able to tolerate the mental friction that demanding creative and intellectual work requires. Hedonic adaptation and the comfort treadmill. There is a cruel irony at the heart of the comfort trap. The more comfortable your baseline becomes, the less satisfaction comfort provides, and the more discomfort ordinary challenges produce. This is hedonic adaptation, the tendency for any new circumstance, positive or negative, to become the new normal to which you adapt, returning to approximately the same baseline level of well-being. The practical consequence is what we might call the comfort treadmill. Each upgrade in comfort, a better mattress, a warmer climate, a shorter commute, faster food delivery, provides temporary relief or pleasure that fades as adaptation occurs. Meanwhile, your tolerance for discomfort decreases, so that challenges that would previously have seemed manageable now feel overwhelming. You are working harder to maintain the same level of felt comfort, and becoming less resilient in the process. This has direct implications for productivity, creativity, and personal growth, all of which require sustained engagement with difficulty and discomfort. If your environment has recalibrated your comfort threshold upward, the normal discomfort of learning a new skill, doing physically demanding work, persisting through a difficult project, or having a difficult conversation will feel disproportionately unpleasant. Not because it is objectively worse than it used to be, but because your baseline has shifted. The solution, as we will explore in Part 3, is not to become an ascetic, to deliberately pursue suffering for its own sake. It is to thoughtfully introduce appropriate friction and challenge into your environment, in domains that support the outcomes you care about, so that your comfort thresholds are calibrated to the reality of the work required to build a meaningful life. Chapter 6. Social friction and invisible peer pressure. Human beings are, above all else, social creatures. We did not evolve as solitary animals who occasionally encounter others. We evolved in small, tight-knit social groups in which our survival was intimately dependent on our relationships. The practical consequence of this evolutionary history is that our brains are extraordinarily sensitive to social information. What others do, what they expect of us, what we think they think of us, and that this sensitivity shapes our behavior in ways that operate largely below conscious awareness. The social environment is, for most people, the most powerful behavioral environment of all. And for most people, it is the least deliberately managed. Social norms as environmental forces. One of the most powerful, and least discussed, drivers of behavior is social norms, the implicit standards of behavior within a group that define what is normal, acceptable, and expected. Social norms operate as invisible environmental forces, shaping choices without the need for explicit rules or enforcement. Robert Cialdini, who has spent a career studying influence, demonstrates through elegant research that people systematically use the behavior of others as a guide to their own behavior, especially in situations of uncertainty. This is adaptive. In many cases, the behavior of others provides genuinely useful information about what is appropriate or safe. But it also means that if the norm in your social environment is sedentary, unhealthy, distracted, or small-minded, you will drift toward those norms with little conscious effort, even if they are precisely contrary to your stated goals. The hotel towel study, conducted by Cialdini and colleagues, illustrates the power of descriptive norms beautifully. Signs in hotel bathrooms asking guests to reuse their towels to help the environment produced some behavior change. Signs saying that most guests in this hotel reuse their towels produced significantly more. And signs saying that most guests in this specific room reuse their towels produced the most of all. The closer and more specific the social reference group, the stronger the normative pull. The 5 people closest to you. There is a piece of folk wisdom, often attributed to motivational speaker Jim Rohn, that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Like much folk wisdom, it is an oversimplification of a more complex reality, but it points at something real and important. Research consistently shows that health behaviors spread through social networks. Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler's landmark work on social contagion demonstrated that obesity, smoking, happiness, and even loneliness spread through social networks in ways that suggest genuine social contagion rather than mere similarity of people who choose to associate. Having an obese close friend increased a person's probability of becoming obese by 57%. The effect was largest for same-sex close friendships and diminished with social distance but was detectable up to 3 degrees of separation. Similar patterns have been found for exercise, alcohol consumption, sleep habits, emotional regulation, and academic achievement. The people you spend time with shape your behaviors, your norms, your self-concept, and your expectations, not through explicit pressure or instruction, but through the constant, ambient influence of what they model as normal and desirable. This is not a reason to abandon your relationships, but it is a serious reason to be thoughtful about the social environment you inhabit and to actively seek relationships with people who embody the behaviors and values you want to cultivate in yourself. The social environment of work. The workplace is a social environment of extraordinary power, particularly because of the sheer amount of time most adults spend in it. The norms of your workplace, around productivity, ambition, work-life balance, health behaviors, ethics, shape your own norms profoundly. In a workplace where staying late is the norm and leaving on time signals insufficient commitment, you will tend to stay late regardless of your values around work-life balance. In a workplace where rushing through lunch at a desk is the norm, you will tend not to take proper breaks regardless of your knowledge that breaks improve performance. In a workplace where certain kinds of conversations are normal and others are taboo, your own thinking will be shaped accordingly. One underappreciated feature of the workplace social environment is what organizational psychologists call psychological safety, the belief that one can speak up, take risks, and admit mistakes without fear of punishment or humiliation. Research by Amy Edmondson at Harvard Business School has shown that psychological safety is the single strongest predictor of team performance, more important than talent, experience, or resources. Teams with high psychological safety make more mistakes, which turns out to be a good thing, because they surface and correct errors quickly. Teams with low psychological safety hide mistakes, which allows small problems to become catastrophic ones. If your work environment has low psychological safety, it is creating a social atmosphere in which anxiety, defensiveness, and risk aversion are rational responses to genuine dangers. And those emotional states are not conducive to the focused, creative, courageous work that produces outstanding results. The loneliness epidemic and its behavioral consequences. There is one more social environmental phenomenon that deserves extended attention: the epidemic of loneliness now affecting most wealthy countries. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, in his 2023 Advisory on Loneliness in America, reported that approximately half of American adults reported measurable loneliness even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Similar patterns have been documented in the UK, Japan, Australia, and across Europe. Loneliness is not merely an unpleasant feeling. It is a state of physiological stress, one that affects the immune system, cardiovascular health, sleep quality, and cognitive function. Lonely people are more likely to engage in a wide range of health-negative behaviors: smoking, heavy drinking, poor diet, physical inactivity, and excessive screen time. Not, typically, because they are weak or lacking in character, but because their social environment is failing to provide the connection, meaning, and external accountability that protect against these behaviors. Many modern urban environments are structurally loneliness-producing. Car-dependent neighborhoods eliminate the casual encounters of walking. Apartment living offers proximity without community. Remote work removes the social infrastructure of the office. Smartphone-based communication substitutes thin, asynchronous digital contact for the rich, embodied experience of real human presence. These are environmental facts, not personal failures. Chapter 7. The architecture of your physical space. Walk into a Las Vegas casino and observe what is absent. Windows, clocks, natural light, exits that are easy to find, or any environmental feature that would remind you of the outside world and the passage of time. This is deliberate. Casino design is among the most sophisticated environmental architecture in the world. Every feature has been studied and optimized to maximize time on the floor and money spent. The comfortable seats, the free drinks, the specific positioning of high-paying machines, the absence of any environmental cue that might prompt you to leave, all of it is designed to shape your behavior. Your home, your office, and the spaces you inhabit regularly are also environments that shape your behavior. They are just, in most cases, designed by default, by convenience, habit, and circumstance, rather than by anyone who has thought carefully about what behaviors they support or undermine. Spatial priming. The concept of environmental priming, the idea that features of an environment can activate particular thoughts, feelings, and behavioral dispositions without conscious awareness, is well established in psychology. Physical spaces prime behaviors. Hospitals prime quietness and deference. Libraries prime focused reading. Churches and temples prime reverence. Gyms prime physical effort. These priming effects operate automatically and are difficult to resist. Research by scholars like Roger Ulrich has shown that even relatively subtle features of physical environments, the presence of plants, views of nature, levels of noise and natural light, have measurable effects on psychological states, recovery from illness, cognitive performance, and behavior. Hospital patients with views of trees recovered faster and required less pain medication than those with views of walls. Workers in offices with natural light slept better, exercised more, and reported higher well-being than those in artificially lit offices. These are not trivial effects. They are robust findings that have been replicated across dozens of studies. What this means practically is that the physical features of your home and workspace, lighting, layout, the presence or absence of nature, noise levels, clutter, temperature, are influencing your behavior in constant, automatic ways. Most people have never consciously designed these features to support their goals. And many people live and work in spaces that actively undermine them. Clutter and cognitive load. There is a growing body of research on the relationship between environmental clutter and psychological function. Studies show that cluttered environments are associated with higher cortisol levels, lower productivity, more difficulty concentrating, and greater feelings of anxiety and overwhelm. This is not simply because tidy people are more organized in general. Experimental designs that expose people to cluttered versus tidy environments find effects even in people who don't particularly care about tidiness. The mechanism appears to involve something called task-relevant cues. Clutter is, in essence, a collection of unfinished business, objects out of place, tasks undone, decisions deferred. Each item of clutter is a small environmental reminder of something that needs attention. When your visual environment is full of such reminders, they compete for cognitive resources, creating a subtle but persistent state of low-level overwhelm that reduces the mental bandwidth available for focused work. Researchers Kathleen Voss and colleagues have also found that cluttered environments are associated with more creative and unconventional thinking, while tidy environments promote conventional, rule-following behavior. This is a nuanced finding. Not that clutter is good or bad, but that different environmental configurations support different cognitive modes. The practical implication is that you might want different environments for different kinds of work. A tidier space for focused, analytical work. A more stimulating, varied space for brainstorming and creative work. The kitchen architecture problem. Nowhere is the power of physical environment over behavior more clearly demonstrated than in food research. Brian Wansink, whose work at Cornell's Food and Brand Lab produced dozens of illuminating, if sometimes subsequently contested in their specifics, studies on food behavior, showed repeatedly that environmental features like plate size, packaging, lighting, container placement, and the visibility of food had dramatic effects on consumption, often without conscious awareness. People eat less when food is served on smaller plates, even when they know smaller plates are being used. They eat more when food is visible and accessible than when it must be retrieved from a cabinet or refrigerator. They consume less from opaque containers than transparent ones. They serve themselves more in darker lighting. The mere sight and smell of food activates eating behavior even in the absence of genuine hunger. Translated into practical terms, the architecture of your kitchen is shaping what you eat, quite possibly more than your nutritional knowledge or your intentions. If the candy bowl is on the counter and the salad requires preparation, you will eat more candy and less salad. If healthy snacks are at eye level in the refrigerator and unhealthy options are on higher shelves, you will eat more healthily. This is not about being weak. It is about being human. Dedicated spaces and behavior. One of the most powerful principles in physical space design is the concept of dedicated spaces, spaces associated with and designed for specific activities. The bedroom is for sleep and intimacy. The office is for work. The gym is for exercise. The meditation cushion is for meditation. When spaces have clear, single purposes, they become powerful cues for the behaviors associated with them. When spaces become multi-purpose, when you work in your bedroom, eat at your desk, and scroll social media on your couch, the behavioral priming of each space becomes confused and diluted. The bedroom, associated with work and screens, primes wakefulness rather than rest. The desk, associated with eating and entertainment, fails to prime focused work. The boundaries that once automatically supported the right behaviors in the right contexts dissolve. In the era of remote work and small living spaces, maintaining dedicated spaces for different activities is genuinely challenging. But the challenge does not eliminate the principle. If anything, the challenge makes intentional space design more important. Even small rituals that differentiate spaces can help. A specific chair always used for reading, a particular corner always cleared for exercise, a standing rule that no screens enter the bedroom. Chapter 8. The Chronobiology of Failure. Your biology has a time dimension. This is not metaphorical. Your body runs on an intricate, pervasive timing system called the circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour biological clock that regulates virtually every physiological process. Hormone levels, body temperature, immune function, metabolism, cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and more. Understanding your chronobiology, and the ways in which the modern temporal environment disrupts it, is essential to understanding why so much of what you try to do fails. The circadian architecture of performance. Cognitive and physical performance are not constant throughout the day. They vary in predictable patterns, driven by the interplay of your circadian rhythm and what sleep scientists call sleep pressure, the accumulating drive to sleep that builds from the moment you wake up. For most people, working on the widely documented chronotype of a morning type, peak alertness and cognitive performance occurs in the mid-morning, between roughly 9 a.m. and noon. A secondary peak occurs in the late afternoon. A strong dip occurs in the early afternoon. The post-lunch slump, which is not caused by lunch but is a circadian feature that occurs even in the absence of eating. Research by Christopher Barnes, Michael Scullin, and others on the timing of cognitive tasks shows that the match or mismatch between task demands and circadian position significantly affects performance quality. Complex, creative, or ethically demanding tasks are better performed during peak circadian hours. Routine, administrative, or mechanical tasks can be handled during off-peak hours with less cost. People who schedule their most demanding cognitive work during their circadian troughs, or who have schedules imposed on them that force this, will systematically underperform relative to their actual capabilities. The sleep environment crisis. Sleep is perhaps the single most important environmental factor in human performance, well-being, and behavior, and it is perhaps the most systematically undermined by the modern environment. Matthew Walker, in Why We Sleep, argues that human beings are in the grip of a catastrophic sleep deprivation epidemic driven almost entirely by environmental factors. Artificial light at night, 24-hour work expectations, the smartphone in the bedroom, the cultural stigma around sleep as laziness, and the architecture of working hours that force early rising. The effects of sleep deprivation on behavior are not subtle. A night of 6 hours of sleep rather than 8 produces performance deficits equivalent to being legally drunk. Yet most sleep-deprived people do not notice their impairment. The same sleep deprivation that impairs judgment also impairs the ability to assess one's own judgment. 2 weeks of 6-hour nights produces impairment equivalent to 24 hours of total sleep deprivation. 50 to 70 million Americans report regularly sleeping fewer than 7 hours per night. Critically, for our purposes, sleep deprivation is not simply a performance issue. It is a behavior issue. Sleep deprivation dramatically increases impulsivity and risk-taking, reduces self-control, increases emotional reactivity, impairs decision-making, and increases the appeal of immediate rewards relative to future ones. In other words, being underslept makes you more likely to eat junk food, spend impulsively, procrastinate, lose your temper, check your phone, and make poor decisions in almost every domain. The behavior failures you are attributing to laziness or weakness may simply be the predictable consequences of a sleep environment that is systematically failing you. Temporal myopia and the present bias. Beyond the circadian clock, the modern temporal environment creates a kind of temporal myopia, an exaggerated focus on the immediate present at the expense of the future. This is partly a feature of modern communication technology, which delivers news, messages, and events in real time, creating a sense that the only moment that matters is this one. It is partly a feature of economic precarity, which makes short-term thinking rational when the future is genuinely uncertain. And it is partly a designed feature of consumer culture, which profits from immediacy, buy now, feel good now, decide now. The result is an environment that constantly pulls your attention and decision-making toward the immediate present, making long-term planning, sustained effort, and deferred gratification harder than they need to be. The person who saves for retirement or studies for a future career or exercises for long-term health is swimming against a powerful cultural current that says, the present is what matters, now is when you should feel good. Chapter 9. The Information Environment. We live in the most information-rich environment in human history, and it is making many of us dumber, more anxious, more confused, and less capable of sustained rational thought. This is not because information is inherently bad. It is because the way information is packaged, delivered, and algorithmically curated in the modern information environment is systematically incompatible with the cognitive processes required for good thinking. Information overload and decision quality. Barry Schwartz's work on the paradox of choice demonstrated that beyond a certain point, more options do not improve decisions, they degrade them. When faced with too many choices, people experience choice overload. They become paralyzed, make worse decisions, feel less satisfied with the decisions they do make, and are more likely to choose the default or make no choice at all. The same phenomenon applies to information. Research on information overload in decision-making consistently finds that providing more information beyond a moderate amount actually reduces decision quality. This is because the cognitive resources required to process, evaluate, and integrate information are finite, and information beyond the processing capacity of those resources produces noise rather than signal. In the modern information environment, where you can access virtually unlimited information on virtually any topic in seconds, information overload is the constant condition rather than the exception. The result is decisions made on the basis of incomplete, superficially processed information, a false confidence that comes from having read much, while actually understanding little. The feeling of being well informed, which is the reward the modern information environment provides, is frequently disconnected from actually being well informed. The epistemological environment. Beyond cognitive overload, the modern information environment creates what we might call an epistemological environment, an environment that shapes not just what you know but how you think, what you trust, and how you evaluate claims. And for many people, this epistemological environment is deeply dysfunctional. Social media algorithms optimize for engagement, and engagement is driven by emotion, particularly by anger, fear, outrage, and moral disgust. Content that provokes these emotions spreads further and faster than content that is nuanced, uncertain, or complex. The result is that the information most likely to reach you, and to receive social validation from your network, tends to be the most emotionally extreme, the most simplistic, the most tribal. Complex realities are replaced by simple narratives. Nuance is punished. Certainty is rewarded. Outgroup vilification generates engagement. In-group complexity generates confusion. This is not a matter of political bias. It affects people across the political spectrum equally. Conservatives and liberals alike inhabit algorithmically curated information environments that systematically distort reality in the direction of greater certainty, greater polarization, and greater emotional intensity. The effect on individual thinking is corrosive. It makes nuanced thought harder, moderation less appealing, and intellectual humility seem like weakness. The news cycle and learned helplessness. There is one more feature of the modern information environment worth examining: the news cycle and its relationship to psychological well-being and motivation. Research by psychologist Martin Seligman identified learned helplessness, a state in which repeated exposure to uncontrollable adverse events produces passivity, depression, and loss of motivation even in situations where action is possible. The modern news cycle is, for many people, a learned helplessness generator. It provides a constant stream of large-scale problems, global crises, political disasters, injustice, violence, environmental destruction, that are real and serious, but over which the individual reader has little or no direct control. The emotional experience of consuming this content, the anxiety, anger, and distress it generates, is disproportionate to any concrete action it produces. The result, for many news-heavy consumers, is a pervasive background state of anxiety and helplessness that drains motivation and reduces the bandwidth available for the personal challenges that are actually within their control to address. Part 3. Redesigning Your World. Chapter 10. Friction Engineering, Making Good Hard to Avoid. Here is the central design principle of this book, stated plainly: make desired behaviors easier and undesired behaviors harder. This sounds almost too simple, and it is simple, in concept. But the implications of this principle, applied consistently and intelligently across your life, are profound and far-reaching. The technical term for the strategic addition or removal of obstacles to behavior is friction engineering. Friction, in behavioral economics, refers to the effort required to perform a behavior, the physical steps, the cognitive load, the time required, the decision-making involved. High-friction behaviors are those that require significant effort. Low-friction behaviors are those that are easy and immediate. The relationship between friction and behavior is not linear, it is dramatically threshold-sensitive. A small increase in friction can cause a large decrease in behavior, and vice versa. Amazon's one-click purchasing is a masterclass in friction reduction. Removing the steps of entering payment information, shipping address, and confirmation produced massive increases in purchasing. The difference between 1 click and 4 was enormous in behavioral terms, even though 4 clicks is objectively trivial effort. Adding friction to undesired behaviors. If you want to engage in a behavior less, add steps between you and it. This is friction engineering in its simplest form, and it is remarkably effective even when the friction added is quite small. Want to use your phone less? Move the most compelling apps off your home screen, so that reaching them requires several additional steps. Delete social media apps from your phone entirely and access them only through a browser, which adds friction through slower loading, less optimized interfaces, and the extra step of typing the URL. Put your phone in another room at night. These small additions of friction, individually modest, can have dramatic effects on phone use because the automatic, habitual nature of phone checking means that even small interruptions to the automaticity can break the habit loop. Want to eat less junk food? Stop buying it. The single most effective thing most people can do to improve their diet is to not have the food they don't want to eat in their home. The friction of having to leave the house, travel to a store, and make a deliberate purchase is enormous compared to the near-zero friction of walking to the kitchen. This seems obvious but is almost universally underutilized because people trust their in-the-moment willpower more than the research warrants. Want to spend less time watching television? Put the remote control in an inconvenient location. Unplug the television from the wall. Cancel some of the streaming services. Make watching television a deliberate choice rather than an automatic default. The principle extends to alcohol, spending, gambling, social media, news consumption, any behavior you wish to reduce. Add steps, add time, add inconvenience. Make the path from impulse to behavior longer and more deliberate. A few seconds of friction can be the difference between acting on an impulse and letting it pass. Removing friction from desired behaviors. The mirror image of adding friction to bad behaviors is removing friction from good ones. If exercise equipment is visible and accessible, you are more likely to use it. If workout clothes are laid out the night before, you are more likely to exercise in the morning. If healthy food is prepared and at eye level in the refrigerator, you are more likely to eat it. If books are on your bedside table and your phone is in another room, you are more likely to read before sleep. The Japanese concept of mise en place, the restaurant practice of having all tools and ingredients prepared and organized before cooking begins, is a friction reduction strategy. By handling the preparatory friction in advance, chefs make the actual cooking smoother and faster. The same principle applies to any complex behavior you want to make habitual. Prepare the environment in advance so that when it is time to perform the behavior, the path is clear. 2-minute rule. If any step in a desired behavior takes more than 2 minutes of setup, it will often never happen. Not because you lack commitment, but because 2-minute barriers are frequently enough to divert the behavior into something easier. The solution is not to push through with more effort. It is to redesign the behavior so that beginning it takes less than 2 minutes. You don't have to meditate for 30 minutes, you just have to open your meditation app and sit down. You don't have to write an entire report, you just have to open the document. You don't have to run 5 miles, you just have to put on your running shoes. Make starting trivial, and the behavior usually follows. Pre-commitment devices. One of the most powerful friction engineering tools is the pre-commitment device, an arrangement made in advance that makes undesired future behavior harder or impossible. The classic example is Odysseus, who had himself tied to the mast of his ship before sailing past the sirens, knowing that his future self would be irresistibly drawn to swim toward them. He used his present self's rational judgment to constrain his future self's irrational behavior. Modern pre-commitment devices take many forms. The website blocker that you set up in the morning, before willpower is depleted, to block distracting sites during your work hours. The automatic savings transfer that moves money out of your checking account on payday, before you have a chance to spend it. The gym membership paid annually in advance. The accountability partner you have committed to texting when you skip a workout. The commitment contract on platforms like Beeminder, where you pledge money to a cause you hate if you fail to meet your behavioral goals. Pre-commitment works because it acknowledges the reality that your future self, in the moment of temptation, will be less rational and more impulsive than your present self. Rather than trusting your future self to make the right choice, you use your present self's judgment to constrain your future self's options. This is not weakness, it is sophisticated self-knowledge applied as strategy. Implementation intentions. One of the most well-replicated findings in the psychology of behavior change is the power of implementation intentions, specific plans that link a situation to a behavior in the format, when X happens, I will do Y. Research by Peter Gallwitzer and colleagues has shown that forming implementation intentions dramatically increases the likelihood that a goal-directed behavior will be performed, compared to simply having the goal. The mechanism is essentially environmental priming. By specifying in advance the exact cue, the situation, time, or place that will trigger the behavior, you are programming your brain to respond automatically to that cue, removing the need for deliberate decision-making in the moment. I will exercise after work, is a goal. When I arrive home from work, I will change into workout clothes immediately, is an implementation intention. Research suggests the latter is 2 to 3 times more likely to result in actually exercising. Implementation intentions are most powerful when the specified cue is specific, unavoidable, and reliably associated with the context in which you want to perform the behavior. After I pour my morning coffee, I will sit down and write for 30 minutes is more powerful than, I will write in the morning. The cue, pouring coffee, is specific, happens reliably, and can be made to reliably precede the desired behavior. Chapter 11. Cue design, triggering yourself into action. If friction engineering is about adjusting the barriers to behavior, cue design is about adjusting the triggers. Recall the habit loop. Cue, routine, reward. Every habitual behavior is triggered by a cue, an environmental signal that activates the associated routine automatically. Cue design means deliberately placing cues in your environment that will trigger desired behaviors, and removing or disrupting cues that trigger undesired ones. Visual cues. The human visual system is extraordinarily sensitive and deeply connected to behavior. What you see shapes what you do, often without your awareness. This principle has been demonstrated across dozens of domains. People who keep a fruit bowl on the counter eat more fruit. People who have exercise equipment in plain sight use it more often than people who have it stored in a closet. Writers who keep their manuscript or notebook on their desk write more than those who must retrieve it from a drawer. A practical exercise. Walk through your home and ask yourself what each visual feature is cueing. The television remote on the arm of the sofa cues television watching. The wine rack visible in the kitchen cues drinking. The pile of unread books on the floor cues guilt. The yoga mat rolled out in the corner cues yoga. The phone charger by the bed cues late-night phone use. What cues are present that you don't want? What cues are absent that you do? Then redesign. Put the things you want to do where you will see them. Put the things you don't want to do out of sight. This is simple, almost ridiculously so, and it works, repeatedly and reliably, because it works with your brain's automatic visual behavioral systems rather than against them. Habit stacking. One of the most practical cue design techniques is habit stacking, anchoring a new desired behavior to an existing well-established habit, so that the old habit serves as the cue for the new one. The formula is simple. After existing habit, I will new behavior. After I make my morning coffee, I will spend 5 minutes journaling. After I sit down at my desk in the morning, I will spend the first 30 minutes on my most important task. After I brush my teeth at night, I will spend 10 minutes reading. After I eat lunch, I will take a 10-minute walk. The existing habits, making coffee, sitting at the desk, brushing teeth, eating lunch, are reliably occurring behaviors with strong environmental cues attached. By anchoring new behaviors to them, you borrow the cueing power of the existing habits for the new ones. The key to effective habit stacking is ensuring that the existing habit and the new behavior are genuinely compatible, that they occur in the same location, at the same time, and that performing the existing habit does not deplete the resources needed for the new one. Stacking a demanding cognitive task after a mentally exhausting existing habit is less effective than stacking it after a routine, low-effort one. Environmental cue disruption for breaking bad habits. Just as you can design cues to trigger desired behaviors, you can disrupt cues that trigger undesired ones. If the couch cues television watching, rearrange the furniture so the couch no longer faces the television. If walking past the kitchen triggers snacking, keep the kitchen less visually enticing, or take a different route. If seeing your phone triggers checking social media, put the phone in a different room or turn it face down. One of the most effective strategies for breaking unwanted habits is to change your environment dramatically enough that the original cues are no longer present. This is one reason why dramatic life transitions, moving to a new city, starting a new job, recovering from illness in a different environment, are often the moments when people most successfully change long-standing habits. The cues that triggered the old behaviors are absent in the new environment, creating a window in which new patterns can be established before new cues for old patterns develop. Charles Duhigg's work on habit change emphasizes the golden rule of habit modification. To change a habit, you must keep the old cue and the old reward, but insert a new routine. The cue and the craving it generates are often unchosen and difficult to eliminate entirely. But if you identify the routine the cue is triggering and replace it with a different routine that provides a similar or equally satisfying reward, you can redirect the habit loop without having to fight the cue. Chapter 12. The Social Environment Rebuild. Of all the environmental redesigns available to you, the most impactful, and the most difficult, involves your social environment. The people you spend time with, the communities you belong to, the social norms you inhabit shape your behavior more powerfully than any app, any habit system, or any productivity technique. Getting this right is not optional for lasting change. Choosing your social reference groups. Every social group has norms, and those norms exert normative pull on every member. If you want to be healthier, spending time with people for whom health behaviors are normal and expected is one of the most powerful interventions available. Not because they will lecture you about diet and exercise, but because when you are around them, their behaviors normalize yours. What is visible and socially approved shapes what feels natural. This does not mean abandoning existing relationships carelessly. Relationships are among the most important determinants of well-being, and thoughtlessly discarding them in pursuit of more productive social groups would be both foolish and harmful. But it does mean actively and intentionally adding relationships with people whose behaviors you admire, whose goals align with yours, and whose social norms will pull you in directions you want to go. Practically, This means joining communities organized around activities you want to pursue. Running clubs, writing groups, investment clubs, meditation communities, professional associations. Any group organized around a shared practice will expose you to people for whom that practice is normal, and their normalization will support yours. The social commitment to show up, combined with the ambient normalization of the behavior, is a powerful double effect. Accountability structures. One of the most robust findings in behavior change research is that social accountability dramatically improves follow-through on behavioral intentions. When you publicly commit to a goal, when others know your intentions and will ask about your progress, when you have a specific partner who will be aware of your success or failure, you are far more likely to follow through than when you try to change behavior in private. This reflects the deep human sensitivity to social reputation. The prospect of having to report failure is genuinely aversive, often far more aversive than the effort required to succeed. By creating social accountability structures, you harness this aversion in the service of your goals. The discomfort of admitting to your accountability partner that you didn't write today is often greater than the discomfort of writing. Effective accountability structures have several features. They are specific, tracking particular behaviors, not vague goals. Regular, weekly check-ins are more effective than monthly, and involve genuine social stakes, someone whose opinion you care about. Accountability is weakened by vagueness, I'm trying to get healthier, by infrequency, and by partners who will not genuinely challenge you when you fall short. The social contract with your environment. There is a subtler dimension to the social environment rebuild, the social meaning of your spaces and routines. People around you have expectations about how you will behave, and those expectations, consciously or not, constrain your options in ways you may never have examined. If your family expects you to watch television in the evenings, departing from that norm creates social friction. If your colleagues expect you to be available for messages at all hours, setting limits creates social awkwardness. If your social group's primary shared activity is drinking, not drinking requires navigating complex social dynamics. Renegotiating these social contracts is uncomfortable but often necessary, and it is most effective when done explicitly and positively, not as a rejection of the relationship, but as an honest communication of your goals and needs. I'm trying to prioritize sleep, so I'm going to start going to bed earlier, can we adjust our evening plans? Is more effective than simply disappearing from social activities and leaving others to make their own interpretations. Chapter 13. Your body is environment. We have been speaking of the environment as something external, the spaces you inhabit, the people around you, the digital landscape you navigate. But there is an environment that is always with you, one whose conditions powerfully shape every thought, feeling, and behavior you produce, your own body. The state of your body, your sleep, nutrition, movement, hydration, and stress physiology, is an internal environment that is either supporting or undermining everything you try to do. Sleep is infrastructure. We touched on sleep in Chapter 8, but its importance merits extended treatment. Sleep is not a passive rest state. It is an active, extraordinarily complex biological process during which your brain consolidates memories, processes emotions, clears metabolic waste products, repairs tissue, regulates hormones, and does the neurological maintenance work that enables high-quality waking function. Inadequate sleep doesn't just make you tired. It makes you a different, and worse, version of yourself. The implications for behavior are staggering. Even one night of poor sleep measurably increases emotional reactivity, reduces impulse control, impairs decision-making, increases appetite particularly for high-calorie foods, reduces motivation, and creates a bias toward immediate rewards over future ones. In other words, poor sleep makes you more likely to be everything you are trying not to be. It makes you short-tempered, impulsive, disorganized, unmotivated, and prone to all the environmental temptations you are trying to resist. The environmental design of sleep is therefore not a minor wellness concern. It is a foundational productivity intervention. Every hour invested in improving your sleep environment, darker room, cooler temperature, earlier and consistent wake time, no screens for an hour before bed, no caffeine after noon, pays dividends across every other domain of your functioning. Movement is cognitive infrastructure. Physical movement is not separable from cognitive performance, it is its infrastructure. The brain's dependence on the cardiovascular system means that the adaptations produced by regular physical activity, increased cardiac output, improved vascular function, greater density of capillaries in the brain, enhanced neuroplasticity, directly improve cognitive function. Exercise is the most powerful brain-enhancing intervention we know of. The specific effects are worth dwelling on. A single bout of moderate aerobic exercise, 30 minutes of brisk walking, for example, produces measurable improvements in working memory, attention, processing speed, and executive function that last for 2 to 4 hours. These are not trivial effects. They are comparable in magnitude to the effects of stimulant medications used for ADHD. Regular exercise, over weeks and months, produces structural changes in the brain. Increased volume of the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus, improved connectivity between brain regions, and protection against age-related cognitive decline. Designing your body's environment to include regular physical movement is therefore not a health vanity. It is a decision about the cognitive quality of your waking hours. The person who exercises is not just fitter. They are smarter, more focused, more emotionally regulated, and more creative, for hours after each session and cumulatively over time. Nutrition in the brain environment. The brain is metabolically expensive. It consumes approximately 20% of the body's energy despite comprising only 2% of its mass, and its function is exquisitely sensitive to the quality of the fuel it receives. Nutrition affects cognitive performance, mood, and impulse control through multiple mechanisms, providing the raw materials for neurotransmitter synthesis, influencing blood glucose levels that affect attention and emotional regulation, affecting the gut microbiome whose outputs include compounds that directly influence brain function, and modulating inflammation which impairs cognitive performance when chronic. The specific nutritional environment most conducive to high-quality cognitive performance is not, at the broadest level, mysterious. It emphasizes whole foods over processed ones, includes adequate protein for neurotransmitter synthesis, provides stable rather than spiking blood glucose, includes omega-3 fatty acids critical for brain structure, and is rich in antioxidants that reduce neuroinflammation. It avoids, as much as reasonably possible, the ultra-processed foods that produce blood glucose spikes and crashes, the excessive alcohol that disrupts sleep and impairs prefrontal function, and the nutritional voids that leave the brain undersupplied with its operating materials. Critically, the nutrition environment design principles from Chapter 10 apply here. What you keep in your home, how food is prepared and stored, what is visible and accessible, these physical arrangements will determine what you eat far more reliably than your nutritional intentions. Stress physiology and the nervous system environment. Chronic stress is one of the most pervasive and damaging features of the modern human internal environment. Stress, in its acute, short-term form, is adaptive. It mobilizes physiological resources for immediate action, sharpens certain kinds of performance, and motivates problem solving. But chronic, sustained stress, the kind produced by unresolvable demands, social conflict, financial insecurity, and the constant low-level alarm of a notification-rich digital life, has profoundly negative effects on both brain and body. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which over time impairs hippocampal function, memory and learning, reduces prefrontal cortex volume and function, executive function and impulse control, promotes inflammatory processes, disrupts sleep architecture, and produces the constellation of symptoms that we recognize as burnout, emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced sense of efficacy. Managing the internal stress environment is therefore a behavioral design priority. The evidence-based practices for doing so, regular physical activity, sufficient sleep, social connection, nature exposure, meditation, adequate rest and recovery, are not luxury indulgences. They are maintenance operations for the cognitive and emotional infrastructure on which everything else depends. Chapter 14. Digital Habitat Architecture. We spend enormous amounts of our waking lives in digital environments, and we have, for the most part, accepted whatever architecture the creators of those environments have imposed on us without question. This is the equivalent of moving into a house designed to keep you awake, keep you snacking, and keep you agitated, and assuming that the discomfort you feel is a personal failing rather than a design problem. Digital habitat architecture means making deliberate, thoughtful choices about the structure of your digital environment, what devices you use, how they are configured, what apps are installed, when notifications are allowed, where devices are kept, and the rules that govern their use. It means being the architect of your own digital life rather than a passive inhabitant of the architecture others have imposed. The phone redesign. For most people, the smartphone is the most consequential piece of environmental design they interact with. It is with you constantly, It is designed by teams of brilliant engineers to capture as much of your attention as possible, and the choices about how it is configured, made mostly by default when you first set it up, are shaping your behavior in ways you have probably never examined. A comprehensive phone redesign has several components. First, notification architecture. Disable all notifications that do not represent genuine urgency. The default setting for virtually every app is to notify you of everything, because notifications drive engagement. The correct setting for most apps, from a well-being and focus standpoint, is no notifications at all. You can check apps deliberately, on your schedule, rather than being interrupted on theirs. Second, home screen design. Your home screen should be designed for the behaviors you want to encourage, not the ones that profit app companies. Remove all social media, news, and entertainment apps from your home screen. Place them in a folder that requires several steps to reach. Put productivity, health, and communication tools where social media used to be. The visual landscape of your home screen is shaping what you reach for automatically. Third, physical location rules. Establish consistent rules about where your phone lives in different contexts. Not in the bedroom, not on the dinner table, not visible during focused work, kept in a bag rather than a pocket during social situations where genuine presence matters. These physical location rules are friction additions that reduce automatic, reflexive phone checking in contexts where it undermines what you actually care about. The computer environment. Your computer environment, particularly if you do knowledge work, is similarly in need of deliberate design. The browser is the primary environment in which distraction lives, and its architecture shapes your behavior substantially. Browser-based distraction management includes a homepage configured to be a blank page or a productivity tool rather than a news feed, installed blockers that prevent access to distracting sites during designated work periods, and a bookmarks and tabs organization that reduces the friction of getting to what you need while increasing the friction of getting to what you don't. Desktop environment design also matters. A cluttered desktop is a visual representation of unfinished business that creates low-level cognitive load and reduces focus. A single, specific application open during work, with nothing else visible, reduces the temptation to switch tasks. The practice of application isolation, working in one full-screen application at a time and using dedicated windows or virtual desktops for different tasks, recreates digitally the dedicated space principle from physical environment design. Information diet design. Applying the principles of nutritional environment design to information, being deliberate about the quality, quantity, and timing of information you consume, is one of the highest leverage cognitive performance interventions available. Quality. Prioritize information sources that reward slow, careful reading over sources that reward rapid consumption and emotional reaction. Long-form journalism, books, academic work made accessible, and thoughtful podcasts with genuine depth are generally higher quality than social media, push notifications, and cable news. Quantity. Establish a specific, limited time for news consumption rather than having news and social media running continuously in the background of your day. Timing. Consume emotionally activating news content earlier in the day, not in the hour before sleep, when it will disrupt sleep onset and quality. The single most impactful change most people can make to their information environment is to delete social media from their phone and access it, if at all, only through a desktop browser. This single change adds enough friction, and removes enough queuing, to dramatically reduce compulsive social media use for most people. Part 4. Sustaining the new environment. Chapter 15. Identity and Environment, the Feedback Loop. In the opening chapters of this book, we established that behavior is shaped by environment. Now we need to close the loop and examine how behavior, sustained over time in a redesigned environment, shapes identity, and how that identity then reinforces the new environment and the new behaviors. This feedback cycle is the mechanism through which environmental change becomes lasting personal change. How identity is built. Identity, the story you tell about who you are, is not fixed at birth or established once in childhood. It is built continuously through the accumulation of behavioral evidence. Every time you act consistently with a self-image, you provide yourself evidence for that self-image, strengthening it. Every time you act inconsistently with a desired self-image, you weaken your belief that you are that kind of person. This means that behavioral change, even small behavioral change, is identity change in miniature. Every morning that you show up to write, you are accumulating evidence that you are a writer. Every workout is evidence that you are an athlete. Every healthy meal is evidence that you are someone who takes care of their body. The accumulation of these small evidences, over time, shifts the identity, and the shifted identity then makes future behaviors easier because they are consistent with who you believe yourself to be. James Clear's formulation is apt. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. The person with a clear, stable identity as a writer does not agonize over whether to write today. It is simply what they do, as naturally as any other part of their routine. The person still trying to become a writer fights the battle of motivation every day. Environment design, by making the desired behaviors easier and more likely to occur, accelerates the accumulation of identity evidence and thus accelerates the shift in identity. Environment as identity signal. Your environment is not just a shaper of your behavior, it is a signal to yourself and others about who you are. A home lined with books sends a message about intellectual values. A kitchen stocked with whole foods sends a message about health values. A workspace organized for focused deep work sends a message about professional values. These signals are not merely performative. They function as constant reminders of the identity you are building, reinforcing it each time they enter your awareness. This is why the practice of designing your environment is, in part, the practice of designing yourself. When you clear out the junk food and stock the refrigerator with vegetables, you are not just changing what food is available, you are making a statement about who you are and who you are becoming. When you set up a dedicated writing space, you are not just providing a cue for writing behavior, you are materializing a claim about your identity as a writer. The environment becomes an externalized, three-dimensional expression of your values and aspirations. The role of tracking and measurement. One powerful way to create behavioral evidence for identity is to track your behaviors explicitly. Habit trackers, whether paper or digital, provide visual representation of your behavioral consistency, a record that serves as evidence of who you are becoming. The psychological phenomenon of the "don't break the chain" effect, popularized by the comedian Jerry Seinfeld, who reportedly marked off each day he wrote on a calendar and motivated himself by not wanting to break the streak, harnesses the visual representation of consistency as a motivational cue. Tracking works best when it is simple, immediate, and focused on processes rather than outcomes. Tracking, "Did I write for 30 minutes today?" is more motivating than tracking, "Did I write something good today?" Because the process is fully within your control in a way the outcome is not. Process tracking keeps the focus on the identity "I am someone who writes daily," rather than the result, which depends on factors beyond consistent behavior. Community and identity reinforcement. One of the most powerful identity reinforcement mechanisms is community membership. When you belong to a group defined by a shared practice or value, a running club, a meditation community, a professional network, a creative collective, the group's collective identity supports and reinforces your individual identity. You are not just someone who runs, you are a runner, a member of a community of runners. The social identity amplifies and stabilizes the individual one. Communities also provide accountability, encouragement, and modeling. They expose you to people who are further along in the development you are pursuing, normalizing advanced levels of the behavior and expanding your sense of what is possible for you. They provide occasions for recognition and celebration of the behaviors that constitute the identity. They create belonging that is conditional on the practices you want to cultivate, a powerful motivational structure that is absent when you try to change alone. Chapter 16. When environments collapse. No environmental design is permanent. Life is full of disruptions: travel, illness, relationship changes, job losses, moves, global pandemics. Any of these can collapse the carefully designed environmental structures that have been supporting your behaviors, throwing you back into conditions where the old bad defaults reassert themselves. Understanding how to navigate environmental collapse, and how to recover quickly, is a crucial component of lasting change. The vulnerability of routines to disruption. Routines, as we have established, are sequences of behaviors that have become automatic through association with specific environmental cues. The strength of a routine is also its vulnerability. It is tied to specific conditions. When those conditions change, when you travel to a different time zone, when you are sick and confined to bed, when you move to a new city and your familiar spaces are gone, the cues that triggered your habits are absent, and the automatic behaviors they supported tend to collapse. This is why so many people report that their good habits fall apart during vacations, illness, or major life transitions. They have not lost the behaviors, they have lost the environmental conditions that were supporting them. The solution is not to avoid disruption, impossible, but to understand that disruptions require active environmental rebuilding, and to do so as quickly as possible. Research on habit recovery after disruption shows that the longer the gap before re-establishing a behavior, the harder re-establishment becomes. 2 weeks off from exercise is much easier to recover from than 6 months. The environment rebuilding should begin not when you feel ready but immediately, starting, if necessary, with a drastically reduced version of the behavior. Running 3 days per week is far easier to rebuild into a robust habit than running 0 days per week. Even a small version of the behavior maintains the identity, preserves some of the environmental cueing, and prevents the longer break that makes return progressively harder. Travel and disruption protocols. For people who travel regularly, the collapse of home-based environmental structures is a recurring challenge. The solution is what might be called a portable environment, a set of practices, objects, and routines that can be deployed in almost any location and provide a minimal but functional version of the supportive environment you have built at home. A portable environment might include a consistent sleep protocol, same approximate sleep and wake times, a sleep mask and earplugs, avoidance of screens before sleep that can be applied in any hotel room, a minimal exercise routine that requires no equipment and 20 minutes rather than trying to replicate your full gym routine, a simple morning routine that anchors the day, and a set of dietary defaults that can be reasonably achieved even in restaurants and airports. These portable defaults don't optimize performance, they maintain identity and behavioral continuity across disruptions, which is the goal. Using crises as environmental reset opportunities. There is a paradox within environmental disruption. While disruptions collapse existing environmental supports for behavior, they also create unusual opportunities for establishing new ones. Major life transitions, moving, changing jobs, ending or beginning relationships, recovering from illness, disrupt the environmental conditions that supported old habits, including ones you want to keep. But they equally disrupt the conditions supporting old habits you want to break. Research by Wendy Wood and others on habit discontinuities shows that major life transitions produce measurably higher rates of habit change, both adoption of new habits and abandonment of old ones, than stable periods. This is because the cues, contexts, and social norms that maintained old habits have been disrupted, creating a behavioral window in which new patterns can be established before new supporting structures for old patterns develop. People who are aware of this phenomenon can leverage it deliberately. A move to a new city is an opportunity not just to rebuild old good habits in the new environment but to add new ones that were difficult to establish before, because the new environment has not yet been colonized by the old bad defaults. The person moving to a new city can choose a neighborhood near a park. They can join a new gym before developing the habit of not going. They can configure their new home from the start to support the habits they want, rather than gradually accumulating the environmental entropy that undermined habits in the old space. Chapter 17. Building an Anti-Fragile Life. The philosopher Nassim Nicholas Taleb introduced the concept of antifragility, the property of systems that not only resist disruption but actually improve as a result of disruption, stress, and volatility. A fragile system breaks under stress. A robust system survives it unchanged. An antifragile system grows stronger from it. The goal of environmental design is not merely to build a fragile system of carefully maintained habits that collapses under any stress. It is to build systems and practices that become more resilient, more effective, and more deeply embedded over time, including through the inevitable disruptions of a full human life. Redundancy and multiple environmental supports. One principle of antifragility applied to environmental design is redundancy, having multiple environmental supports for a desired behavior, so that the failure of any one does not collapse the behavior entirely. The person who exercises only at a specific gym at a specific time has a single point of failure. The person who runs, weather permitting, uses a gym, when available, has exercise videos for bad weather days, and does bodyweight exercises as a last resort when nothing else is possible, has a redundant system that survives many more disruption types. Similarly, the person whose productive writing depends on a specific home office setup has a single point of failure. The person who can write at home, at a library, at a coffee shop, or on a train, who has portable versions of their creative environment established and practiced, has built a redundant writing environment that continues to function across a much wider range of conditions. Building redundancy means investing in developing multiple versions of your environmental supports for key behaviors, not just the ideal version, but adequate versions for a range of likely conditions. This requires more upfront investment but dramatically increases the resilience of your behavioral systems. Minimum viable behaviors. Related to redundancy is the concept of the minimum viable behavior, the smallest version of a desired behavior that still maintains the identity and the habit loop, even if it produces minimal concrete output. The minimum viable exercise is 1 lap around the block, or 5 push-ups, or a 5-minute walk. The minimum viable writing session is 1 paragraph, or 100 words, or simply opening the document and reading what you wrote last time. The minimum viable meditation is 3 mindful breaths. Minimum viable behaviors are not the goal, they are the floor. They serve 2 functions. First, they ensure that even on terrible days, when every circumstance militates against your habits, some version of the behavior occurs and the identity is maintained. Second, they take advantage of the psychological reality that starting is the hardest part. The person who commits to just 1 lap around the block frequently ends up running for 30 minutes because, once moving, continuing is easier than stopping. The writer who commits to just 1 paragraph frequently writes for hours because, once started, the flow state takes over. Building a recovery system. Every robust behavioral system includes a recovery protocol, a predetermined plan for what happens after a lapse. Research by Janet Polivy on the abstinence violation effect shows that people who lapse from a behavioral intention, eating a cookie when dieting, skipping a workout, spending impulsively, are highly likely to experience an all or nothing thinking pattern that converts a single lapse into complete abandonment of the behavior. I've already broken my diet, so I might as well eat the whole cake. I missed my workout this week, so I might as well skip this week entirely. The abstinence violation effect is not a moral failure, it is a predictable cognitive response to violating a rule. The solution is to plan for lapses in advance, to decide now, from a cool cognitive state, what will happen after a lapse. The rule might be, I never miss twice in a row. Or, after any lapse, my first action is to perform the minimum viable behavior immediately. Or, I will reflect briefly on what environmental condition contributed to the lapse and make 1 small adjustment. Having a predetermined recovery protocol removes the need for difficult in-the-moment decision-making after a lapse. Instead of sliding from, I skipped 1 workout, to, I've given up, you simply execute the protocol, identify what happened, make a small environmental adjustment, perform the minimum viable behavior tomorrow, and continue. Designing for long-term evolution. Finally, an anti-fragile life is one designed to evolve, one in which your environmental designs are regularly reviewed, refined, and updated as your circumstances change and your understanding deepens. The environmental configuration that serves you at the 25th of may not serve you at 45. The habit stack that works in your current job may not transfer to a new one. The social environment that was right in one city may need rebuilding in another. A useful practice is the periodic environmental audit, a systematic review of the major domains of your life environment and an honest assessment of whether they are supporting or undermining your current priorities. Questions to ask. What is my physical space making easy or hard? What are my digital defaults encouraging me to do? Who is shaping my norms and in what direction? What environmental cues am I surrounded by, and what behaviors do they trigger? What friction is preventing the behaviors I most want to cultivate? What is frictionless that should have more resistance? The audit should produce a small number of high-leverage adjustments rather than an overwhelming redesign. The goal is continuous, iterative improvement, small changes that compound over time, just as behavioral habits compound over time to produce dramatically different life trajectories. Conclusion. You were never the problem. We have traveled a long distance together through this book. We have examined the evolutionary mismatch between your ancient brain and your modern environment, the specific ways in which the distraction economy, the comfort trap, toxic social dynamics, dysfunctional physical spaces, chronobiological disruption, and information overload work against your efforts to live intentionally. We have explored the science of habits, the mechanisms of behavior change, and the concrete tools of environmental design. And we have considered how the identity that emerges from sustained behavioral change reinforces and deepens the changes themselves. If there is one idea I hope you carry from this book, it is this: the behavior failures you have experienced, the abandoned habits, the unkept resolutions, the projects left unfinished, the choices you made against your better judgment, were not evidence of your character's inadequacy. They were the predictable outcomes of a human being with an ancient brain navigating an environment designed, often deliberately, to undermine exactly the kind of intentional, disciplined, long-term oriented behavior you were trying to produce. You were not the problem. The environment was the problem. And the environment can be changed. You cannot think your way to a different life from inside the same environment. You must design your way there. The work ahead. Environmental design is not a quick fix. It is a practice, an ongoing, iterative process of noticing what your environment is doing to you, making deliberate adjustments, observing the effects, and refining. It requires the same consistency, over time, that it requires of any skill or habit. The first iteration of your redesigned environment will be imperfect. You will miss things. Some interventions will not work as expected. Others will work better than expected. The process of refinement is itself a form of environmental literacy, the growing ability to read what your environment is doing to you and respond intelligently. Start where you are. You do not need to redesign your entire life at once. In fact, trying to do so is a reliable path to overwhelm and inaction. Choose one domain, one habit you want to build or break, one relationship whose norms you want to shift, one digital configuration that is costing you more than it gives. Make the simplest possible change in the right direction, and notice what happens. Then make the next change. The architecture of a life is not built all at once. It accumulates, brick by brick, adjustment by adjustment, over months and years. Each deliberate change you make to your environment is an investment in your future self, a more capable, more focused, more free version of you who inhabits a world that works with them instead of against them. The deeper freedom. There is a deeper freedom at stake in all of this, and I want to name it explicitly. The goal of environmental design is not productivity for its own sake, not the maximization of output or the optimization of efficiency. The goal is freedom, the ability to live in accordance with your deepest values rather than your most immediate impulses, to act out of genuine choice rather than environmental compulsion, to be, as fully as possible, the author of your own life. The person who has designed their environment to support their most important work, relationships, health, and growth has, in a meaningful sense, claimed their freedom from the myriad forces that would otherwise determine their choices for them. They have become, as the philosopher Harry Frankfurt described it, a person whose first-order desires, what they want in the moment, are aligned with their second-order desires, who they want to be and what they want to value. This alignment, when what you want to do and what you are actually doing match, is one of the deepest forms of human well-being. It is not a state that arrives fully formed. It is approached gradually, through the accumulation of thoughtful choices, well-designed environments, and the behavioral evidence that builds into an identity of someone who lives with purpose and care. But each step in that direction, each piece of friction removed from a desired behavior, each temptation made less accessible, each social environment made more supportive, each morning begun with intention rather than reaction, is a real step toward a real freedom. Final thoughts. Compassion is foundation. One last word. Throughout this book, I have emphasized the environmental causes of behavior, the external forces that make it harder to live as we intend. I want to close by insisting on something that should perhaps have been the first word as well as the last: self-compassion. Understanding that your environment has been working against you is not a license to excuse every lapse or avoid all responsibility. But it is reason, very good reason, to be kinder to yourself about your past failures, and to approach the work of change with patience rather than punishment. Self-criticism, as research by Kristin Neff and others consistently shows, is not an effective motivational strategy. It is correlated with lower resilience, less effective coping, and worse behavioral outcomes. Self-compassion, treating yourself with the kindness you would extend to a close friend in the same situation, is correlated with higher resilience, more effective coping, and better behavioral outcomes. You have been trying to do something genuinely difficult. You have been trying to live with intention and integrity in an environment that often makes that extraordinarily hard. The fact that you have struggled does not make you weak. The fact that you are still trying, that you picked up this book and read to the end, says something important about your character and your commitment. You are not lazy. You never were, and now you have the tools to build the world you deserve to live in. Begin. Further reading and resources on the science of habits and behavior change. Charles Duhigg, The Power of Habit. Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business, 2012. The foundational popular account of the habit loop and its applications to personal and organizational change. James Clear, Atomic Habits, An Easy and Proven Way to Build Good Habits and Break Bad Ones, 2018. Practical and well-researched guide to habit formation with a strong emphasis on identity and system design. Wendy Wood, Good Habits, Bad Habits, The Science of Making Positive Changes That Stick, 2019. Written by one of the world's leading habit researchers, this book provides the most rigorously science-based account of how habits work and how to change them. On Environmental Design and Choice Architecture. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, Nudge, Improving Decisions About Health, Wealth, and Happiness, 2008. The foundational text on choice architecture and how environmental design shapes behavior at both personal and policy levels. Brian Wansink, Mindless Eating, Why We Eat More Than We Think, 2006. Despite later controversies around some specific studies, the core insights about how food environments shape eating behavior remain valuable. Katie Milkman, How to Change, The Science of Getting from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be, 2021. An excellent overview of behavioral science tools for behavior change, including temptation bundling and fresh start effects. On Attention, Focus, and the Distraction Economy. Cal Newport, Deep Work, Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World, 2016. A compelling argument for the value of focused cognitive work and a practical guide to creating conditions that support it. Johan Hari, Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention, and How to Think Deeply Again, 2022. An accessible and personal exploration of the environmental, social, and commercial forces undermining human attention. Tristan Harris' work at the Center for Humane Technology, humanetech.com, provides extensive resources on the design practices of the attention economy and advocacy for better digital environments. On Sleep, Exercise, and the Body Environment. Matthew Walker, Why We Sleep, Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams, 2017. The definitive popular account of sleep science and its implications for health, performance, and behavior. John Rady and Eric Hagerman, Spark, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain, 2008. An excellent account of the neuroscience of exercise's effects on cognition, mood, and behavior. Huberman Lab Podcast, hubermanlab.com, provides accessible but scientifically rigorous content on sleep, exercise, nutrition, and other aspects of the body's performance environment. On Social Influence and the Social Environment. Robert Cialdini, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, 1984, updated 2021. The classic account of the principles of social influence, including social proof and the normative power of others' behavior. Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, Connected, The Surprising Power of Our Social Networks and How They Shape Our Lives, 2009. A fascinating account of how behaviors spread through social networks. Vivek Murthy, Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World, 2020. A compassionate and well-researched account of the loneliness epidemic and its behavioral consequences. On the Brain, Decision-Making, and Self-Control. Daniel Kahneman, Thinking, Fast and Slow, 2011. The essential account of dual process theory and the many ways our automatic thinking systems shape behavior. Roy Baumeister and John Tierney, Willpower, Rediscovering the Greatest Human Strength, 2011. The accessible account of ego depletion research and its implications for self-control and behavior change. Barry Schwartz, The Paradox of Choice, Why More is Less, 2004. A lucid examination of how information and option abundance can paradoxically undermine good decision-making. On Identity, Meaning, and the Psychology of Change. Kristin Neff, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, 2011. Essential reading on the research supporting self-compassion as a more effective motivational strategy than self-criticism. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, 1946. The profound account of finding meaning and agency even in the most environmentally constrained of circumstances. Carol Dweck, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, 2006. The foundational account of growth versus fixed mindsets and their implications for learning, resilience, and identity.